I'm here with Norma Rist from CEO Consulting. Norma is known as one of the top coaches and mentors of women and of course men as well. So let's start now in saying, Norma, with the hundreds, is it hundreds or thousands of women or people that you have coached? Like, what do you learn about being a mentor? Like, what is the most important thing to you about being a great mentor?
Well, if you had to do one word, it would be listening, because you spend most of your time listening. And then, of course, you have to have some background so that you can respond appropriately. And that doesn't come easy. I think that comes with experience. But if you care about the person you're talking to and you listen to the dilemma that they have or the situation that they have or their aspirations, how exciting is that? Then you listen and you come back with all the things that will help them to move from where they are here and where they want to be.
So tell me, Norma, tell me a little about your background. Like, how did this all start? I know you came from the corporate sector and you moved into the entrepreneurial coaching sector. So tell me a little bit how your career path has evolved over your life.
Well, when I first finished college degree in business administration, and they didn't have as many segments you could specialize in. So it was just in management, which was great. And I even took the classes that I could in industrial plants, manufacturing, but that's what they called it then. And I would be the only woman in the class, but that's okay because I really liked it. And I worked for a little bit out of college for the company that I had done part-time work for, doing their accounting, their office work. So that helped because I understood how well that worked. And one other job that got me very familiar with state government, working for a man who had been the first director of development for the state of Ohio. If you can imagine, there was a time in a state organization, they had no director of development for the state. So he was the first. He took an ad in the Wall Street Journal that said, in huge letters, "Profit is not a dirty word in Ohio." So he was a leader, and I worked for him for about a year and a half on some comprehensive planning contracts he had. So I learned a lot from that. But then my first career position was, and by the way, I interviewed for about 40 companies in 20 days. That was really good. I got to know a lot about business. 40 companies were sharing everything about their business with me. I recommend that to anybody who's looking for something. It turned out the offer I had was with Pepsi-Cola, family-owned franchise in the local area. And they needed someone to manage their office and be the accounting manager. And so that was my first position. A year later, they were acquired by a Fortune 300 company. So what that gave me was two things that were pretty important. Off-site, you had corporate experts. So anything that you needed to know, or very good information on setting up your policies, all the procedures, everything operations, everything finance, I got to learn what they knew. But marketing was local. That's important because then we were working on marketing and I wasn't. I became the controller, but I learned from the people who were doing the marketing, doing the sales, how you do that, because all that was handled locally. And as a result, I was with them for a little over 20 years. I wanted to be the vice president and general manager and manage the franchise. That took me between 17 and 19 years to achieve that. If you can imagine, most of the individuals who were in that organization either drove a truck or they knew about the beverage industry. And I wasn't either, and I wasn't male. In fact, most of my mail came addressed Norma Rist. They couldn't picture that a Norma could be the controller. So they added another letter on there. So I learned a lot because I had to go on the outside to get my professional development. And I started to be very involved in the community. That got me well acquainted with people who are serving on boards, nominating committees. So I served on a dozen boards and most of them would bring me in as treasurer, and then it's very easy to move to vice chair and then chair of the board. So that gave me really good experience in the community. When the beverage division was sold, the entire beverage division, which by that time they had accumulated more than 20 franchises across the country. they let all the general managers go. The buyer had a different management matrix. So I did some consulting, actually consulted with a Coke franchise in Virginia. They had 8 franchises. I didn't.
So here's someone who had no business in the field, and now you're like the expert
Yes,
in the beverage business.
exactly.
Yeah.
But I spent all that time getting to know that, so that I went into the Coke franchise, as it turned out, knowing more than they did. They were a family company. I had been with a corporate entity that every day, all day long, they worked on how to maximize profitability, how to take care of their shareholders. They were an ethical company, very ethical. So they also made sure everything was run right. And that was a fit for me. So I learned everything, and joining the family company as a consultant for 2 years. They were 10 years behind where they should be, and I was 10 years ahead.
Oh.
And that was the 20 years I had just lived. I knew right where they were and where they could be. So I did that for a couple of years.
How did that turn into this entrepreneurial coach business? Obviously, you've been doing that for a long time.
I had, in that period then, worked with organizations up to about 500 employees, some of the franchisees with the Pepsi-Cola beverage division of General Cinema. And then also in both situations, there would be a warehouse that did not have manufacturing, but they had 10 employees, and they had the storage in their remote area, and they had 15 trucks that went out every day. So I got the experience of the sizes of organizations, both manufacturing as well as sales and distribution. And that has served me well as an entrepreneur and as coaching other owners, because I had not worked in all those places, but as a consultant, I was in all those places. I saw their financial, I entered their building, I watched their daily activities, and I used all of that and still do to this day.
Huh, fascinating. And so when you started working the entrepreneurship space, what did you notice or still notice that early stage entrepreneurs struggle with, that maybe having some of the corporate experience that you had would actually make them more successful? What are they struggling? What are the gaps in their expertise and their way of thinking?
Usually the 2 biggest things are hiring right and training, keeping a team that's the right, best team. They don't have that experience when they're an entrepreneur unless they worked in that area. And most entrepreneurs don't come out of HR. Some do, and they do HR consulting. That's fine. But if you were in sales, or you were in manufacturing, and you were in operations, and you start something, you're not an expert in HR. And you're not the best at building a team. And they don't know how to fill all the positions. There'll be positions open, and they don't know the best way to get the best person in there. And they just had 2 that didn't work out. And that wasn't the employee problem. That was the employer problem. So that's one. The second one is, and it's a little easier to take care of, is they can't read their financial.
No.
So I had spent all those years knowing financial statements, particularly the P&L, backwards, forwards, and sideways. And I could teach that to them. I had one warehouse, no one could understand how they made it, the profit that they did based on the number of cases they sold, higher than 27 other locations. Well, I knew why, because every time I went in there, I helped the manager of that location to read the financial statement and know how to make the needle move. So they can take, new entrepreneurs can take care of that one the quickest if they ask enough people. If they go after it, if they realize that they don't know that much. It's not a matter of just looking at the revenue and looking at the profit, understanding what to do to actually make that improve, how to get that revenue increase, and how you plan for it, and how you live by budgeting, and then live every month against the budget. And if you make your budget every month, you make it for the year. And then your fixed expenses, more or less fixed, that are in your expense section, stay mostly the same, and you'll make the profit that you budgeted. So if you ask for enough help, that can be accomplished pretty easily.
And so
the HR thing, need to find some help with that too.
So going back to something you said in the first part of our conversation was that, this notion of listening, right? So people who are first-time mentors think they're being asked to do this because of their expertise. But now you're saying that listening is extremely important. Like, how do you balance this notion of listening and being the expert? Like, how does that all come together? If you were coaching a new mentor, how would you tell them, how would you help them make that transition, or how do they be the expert, but at the same time be a good listener?
Memorize the word. Think about it as they go into the meeting until they get used to it. Because when you're a natural teacher, you are, I am, you want to teach, and you hear something and you think, oh, they need that. And you want to begin your teaching, but you haven't listened enough yet to see what they need, and they may not be ready for what it is you have in your mind yet. So remembering that they are not just a month behind you or a year behind you, they may be 15 or 20 years behind you in knowledge, and you have to go back and meet them somewhere and help them come forward. And you can only do that by listening. I'm lucky that I could remember everything from when I started as a young woman out of college. And I actually will be sitting with someone and I think, oh my goodness, that man is just about like I was 3 years out of college on how to run something, on communications within an organization, or how you do an evaluation. And by listening, then I know where to meet them to help move them forward. The other thing is, mentors don't always realize it is a little more like coaching than consulting. Because in coaching, you're encouraging, you're bringing them forward. You're not telling them what to do. You're giving them ideas. You're asking them how that sounds. You're asking them, would they like to go into that more, and what would the steps be to move forward on that path? Or you're working with them to identify 3 different paths that they might like to follow in the growth or the development of their business. And then with that, they're choosing. It's their company, it's their risk. And so you're giving them ideas, and at the same time, you're protecting them. Because if they want to go down that path, you can say, I know what that looks like. Let me describe a little bit about that path to you to see if that's the one you want to choose. And you're explaining what the risk is. And if that's too risky for them, then you look at what are the ways you can mitigate that risk. You can still go down that path, but you might be able to reduce the risk.
What's interesting about that is what you're doing is you're seeding them with your expertise, giving them the chance to own the solution, grab onto it, and make a decision for themselves. This is a very hard thing. Like, can you give me an example of some point where you knew an entrepreneur was just heading down the wrong, like, this is in your head, like, this is really not, this is going to end in total disaster. Like, and what do you do? Like, what do you do as a mentor coach? Like, how do you not let them do that? You talk about protection, you talk about listening. Like, how do you not let them go down that road and prepare and provide them that support they need to, like, go down the road that's going to really be more successful?
They might do that in any area. So if you think of the functional areas of a company or an organization, you've got the financial area, you've got your operations area, whether it's manufacturing or any kind of distribution or a service that you're offering, you've got the operations of running that. And then you have the other areas, sales and so on. And in any of those, but particularly in HR, they will think that they know that they have an opening and that this is sort of the qualifications of the person they want to fill that opening. And they even will say, well, I have a part-time opening over here and a part-time opening over here. So it makes total sense to put them together and hire one person. Then I'll get it all done, except that the 2 things don't go together and the expertise won't be there. Even if they find someone who agrees to do it, they'll be an expert in one and they won't even like doing the other. Or the 2 don't fit in your activities, your daily activities. So on the lowest, I don't mean lowest level, but on a simple level, someone will say, well, I need someone to answer the phone, but they have all this time in between. So why can't they do my bookkeeping in between answering the phone? Well, those 2 things don't go together. But I see that at the highest level too. They'll be going to hire someone in sales, but they want them to do the project management at the same time.
Yeah.
Not always a good fit. And I hear them and I listen.
Yeah.
I don't say anything. But then we have to talk about even right through to how are you going to evaluate that person? And which area will be most important? If you're looking for key results, will it be the sales results they achieved? Or will it be that their team said that they were the best team in the company because they worked for this person as the project manager?
You
Might
know,
not fit together.
something you said about, what I hear about entrepreneurs, and I've been working a lot with college students or recent college graduates and starting up companies, and they believe they could do everything, and they believe that everyone on the team does everything, right? So you're countering that and saying, well, maybe not, that's not the right approach. So the question is, when you have no money, you're bootstrapping it, you're doing all your websites by yourself, you're doing all these things, you don't have all the skills, your team doesn't have all the skills. Like, what advice do you have to someone sort of in that early phase to make sure that they don't make that mistake by assuming that if I can't do it, then it can't be done?
Usually I am coaching for two parts: the short term, which means everybody has to pitch in and do everything. But at the same time, I'm coaching for a little longer term out. And I will say, that's probably going to work for a year, two max. But after that, you're going to have to separate this job and this job. So will you do me a favor and put them on the organization chart with two names, and then put John under both of them? Because right now, John's going to do both. But John needs to know that a year down the road, James is going to do half of that job, because John's job is going to double in size. And maybe John gets to choose which one to keep. The other one's going to be done by someone else. So I'm teaching the future, even though I'm saying right now, perfect, absolutely. Get someone who's multifaceted, they can do all kinds of things. Oh my goodness, this person has some MIS background, but they also have accounting, but they also were responsible for all the computer maintenance equipment. Oh, how wonderful. But know that let's put that in separate boxes on the org chart, because as you get bigger, that will be 2 or 3 people.
Norma, years ago, I remember you had this club of women that you were trying to, would you call it the CEO? What would you call it, a group for the $1 million? It was like the $1 million club. What was it called?
I did. It was $1 million group. I wanted a group of women who would get together with me regularly and talk about how to build $1 million business.
Yeah. So what's the magic there?
Beyond
the magic there? That's easy to say. Like you could start saying, "Oh, I can make my 10,000, my 20,000, sell an app, whatever it is." But that $1 million is scary, and like it seems like this big hurdle for an early stage entrepreneur. What was the magic in the conversations with these women that helped them get from here's an idea to I'm getting there, I'm moving into the $1 million mark?
The magic is when you do the numbers, and you can say in year 1, it looks like a $50,000 endeavor, and you can pay your bills. How incredible is that? Because a lot of entrepreneurs start up and they can't pay their bills yet. They're still working part-time somewhere to do that. And then we take some forms that I have and we separate what are the products or what are the services. And if you had one more person like you, or 2 more people like you, who could triple your work, how much could they do? And we do a page with the numbers. So I remember in my first workshop on building $1 million business, we did this, they all did a page, and I gave them all calculators. I think there were about 18 in the room, and gave them all calculators and these pages. And they sat there and they worked, and they had a question they asked me and I answered it. And about 15 minutes later, they all had some numbers. They totaled some numbers for the year. And they looked at me in amazement, because they saw where their $1 million business could come from.
So it's doing the math. And it's not complicated
Yes.
math, it's just doing the math, right?
Yes.
So I know you have great expertise in working with women. I've worked with you before. You were terrific and always helpful and inspiring and giving me good advice. But what is it about women that's different than working with men? Like what is it about them, and how do you help women specifically, and what characteristics do they have as entrepreneurs that you embrace?
Well, I discovered there were some differences. I would be in a room speaking and I would be talking about business, and there would be a little group of entrepreneurs. I remember one dinner, there were about 20 around the table. And I said to them, how many want $1 million business? 1. 19. No. Not me. Same thing in a group. I had 100 in an audience. How many want $1 million business? I got maybe 10. The other 90, no. Absolutely not. And I wanted to figure it out. Why were the women so hesitant? when that same group, if it would happen to be all male, I'd get 99% of them. Oh, yes. Tell me how to get there. I'll start tomorrow morning. So I did some little focus groups of my own with some owners that I had access to. And as I did some of these, I did different parts of this focus group until I figured it out. And it was that women generally have some their responsibilities that they take very seriously, and that they believe if their business fails, then it's a reflection on them, and they might not even be able to get a job to care for their children, to care for their parents, to care for their church, to care for their school. They feel the responsibility for others, and that if what they're starting doesn't work, then they will have failed not only in their business, but they may not be able to take care of the people they need to care for. So they're much more careful, and they keep the success of the business very close to them. That business means more to them than just earning a living. It means they are safe and secure to care for their children for many years. They are safe and secure to put their children through school if they're somewhere where that might not be possible otherwise. And so the business means to them, if they fill out a list of, what do I want out of my business? They have an average of 10 or 12 things that are of highest score importance. And so if I give them a list and there's 30 items on there and they're check the ones that are most important to them, they'll check about 10 of them, but when they score them for how important, 1 to 10, they're all 10s. I've done that with a group of men. I get 2 10s. And if they think there's a possibility they would lose their business and it would affect their reputation, they will not start it. They will not go into it because they're afraid of what might happen. So that's the case where they have to have a plan. They have to mitigate the risk. They have to start it as small. And a very good thing happened a couple decades ago with the internet. They're able to create a business to earn a great deal of money, but they don't have to build bricks and mortar and big parking lots full of employees' cars, because that would be another responsibility on top of the children and the parents and the church and the school. They're able to build a bigger business and earn more revenue and more profit, but they don't have the exposure, the risk of having that business be out there and with a number of employees who they now also need to take care of.
Of course,
so there is some uniqueness to it.
Yeah, and so now it's even easier, right? You've got the people who are used to e-commerce and online businesses, and now we're forced, based on the pandemic, that we can actually do that, and it's more acceptable.
Yes. I have a group of women that's all they're working on is, and they may be working full time. They may still have their current income, but on the side, they are working towards that regular job they have, whether it's, they're independent, but let's say they're an independent CPA, that slowly handling taxes for individuals will be less and less over a 10-year period as internet revenue grows and grows from a membership. Yeah. And so I have a couple dozen women that I'm working with on that.
Yeah, well,
and so fits their needs.
And what's the, I guess I think about this with men and women, and I, work with both men and women and entrepreneurs, and I do find that men are more willing to jump off a cliff and not care, right? They just do it, right?
They don't hold it as part of them. It's like, here's me, here's the business. If the business fails, the timing wasn't right. I couldn't get the right person. I didn't get the right first customer. There's any number of reasons the business fails, but it has nothing to do with him. He'll start another business just like that.
Yeah, interesting. And so when you're coaching women, how does that differ? If you're a mentor for a woman versus a man, whether you're a man or a woman coach, like how do you differentiate that kind of interaction?
It is much more a supportive mentoring situation. What is it you think that you need? Let's work on what's the time frame that will work for you, and what kind of resources do you need? So when I have a meeting with a group, that's always a question, every single meeting. What resources do you need to be prepared so that they have the expertise that's needed? Women also tend to think they need to know 140% before they start. And I truly have worked with men who they had an idea and they had, like 5% of it sitting right there. And they would say, look, I can do this. They don't know 95% of it, but they don't care.
Yeah.
They figure they'll pick that up on the way. They'll get it from me, other people. The woman, she wants to make sure she has every base covered before she starts. So it's important then, as I'm coaching or mentoring, that we're talking about what are the things that will let you start small, but provide for the growth that you're looking for, to have the income you're looking for. And those $1 million groups, they got converted to having a special definition. It means pay yourself $250,000 a year in US dollars. Pay yourself $250,000 a year. And everyone will say, yep, that would make me happy. That's all I need. I don't need to be a billionaire. I need to, for everything I want to do in my lifetime, if I can pay myself $250,000 a year, year after year, that will meet every need I have at this moment. So we call it $1 million company, but it may be less than $1 million. It may only be a $500,000 company if it's a membership site, because you can support that with 50% cost and 50% profit.
Yeah, amazing. It's really interesting. I think that your background as a controller and in the financial world really lets you step back, because I see a lot of people support entrepreneurs are about the vision and the ideas, and I want to be Stephen Jobs and like all these things. But in the end, it's that number crunching that gives some kind of substance and reality to what you're doing, because all the great, I know there's a lot of people say, just get some great idea. Don't worry, people will show up. And of course we hear that Bezos did it. Like, he just had this idea. I'm sure there's a lot more, supporting that concept.
Right.
But this math thing is really fascinating as a sort of a precursor to a plan, as opposed to
it's
just
also part of the difference between coaching someone that's in a corporation. So you may have a mentor inside a company, and they may be a mentor to someone that's newer or just came on board, and they're helping them to get to know the company. They may be helping them to be on partner track. They may be helping them to get promotion, their career. It's career coaching, which is very different than the mentor who's working with an entrepreneur. So the mentor working with an entrepreneur has to know a little about the numbers. And if you're going to hire people, how are you going to pay them? Projecting cash flow. And then all the marketing and understanding how marketing is separate from sales. So all of that it might be a little more clear to the person who's in a corporation, but it's not the same type of coaching. It's not the same type of mentoring. Right. And so a couple of mentoring programs that I set up for entrepreneurs, we had enough entrepreneurs to find both mentor and mentee. But here's what happens. You wonder who gets to choose who. Does the mentee get to choose the mentor they want, or does the mentor get to choose the mentee they want?
Great question. And what's the answer?
The answer is the mentor gets to choose. Because any mentor who has certain pieces of knowledge that will be good backup for encouraging, supporting, a little bit of here's how this works, they know what that is. And the mentee does not know what they have in their head to share. But the mentee submits a letter, a simple letter. I would like to know, and they write things. Or they apply with their company to be, or they, in this case, they were sending it into a nonprofit organization. So they filled out a form. I would like a mentor. Here's what I do. Here's what I want to learn. Here's where I want to go with this. And the most difficult part then for this situation, twice I did this, was to match a mentor and a mentee, but it was still the mentor who got to say yes first. And so I looked at every mentee application and what they needed. And because I have enough business background of different kinds, I knew what all the words meant. So I would read what they were doing, where they were at. Even if they used the wrong word, I knew what word they meant to use, because I got a sense of where they were at. And so there they are. And then I would say, I think Susan Smith would be a really good mentor for this person. Let me send this over to Susan and see if she agrees. Right. But the mentor chooses, Because if the mentor's not comfortable that there's some difference, or I don't know, they share a client somewhere, so any reason, then that would not be a good match. But I did the matches for a couple dozen mentors and mentees, all entrepreneurs, 2 years in a row. There were 2 different cohorts, and no one else was able to do that. There are other people who could have done it. We just couldn't find someone in our community quickly that had the background that I had to be able to do the matching.
So failure. Let's talk about failure for a moment. How does a mentor handle, when do you want to just say, yeah, this is not working out? Like, how do you work out a relationship that's just not happening? And how do you confront that when there's a struggle or when you feel like this is just not a good match?
That, and along with a couple of other things, should be a part of sort of the little informal agreement between the mentor and the mentee, which can be as short as the mentee says, I need to learn about how a certain thing works. Could I possibly buy you coffee maybe twice? And would you share with me how that works? So that there it is. We've set the ground. If it's informal like that, still in that sentence, it's 2 coffees and the scope of the discussion was defined.
Right.
On the other hand, you may have a formal arrangement, and it may be through an organization like the one I was talking about. And then you're talking about, this is a 6-month program, this is a year's program. You're still identifying for the mentor and the mentee what to expect. Without setting out the expectations, you run into trouble. Yeah. So one of the things you're setting up is likelihood of number of meetings or hours per month, likelihood of the scope of the conversations that can be covered. Doesn't mean nothing else could be covered, but it's not part of the core. And thirdly, if it doesn't work out, we will talk at on the last day of each month and say, is this still working well for both of us? Shall we continue? Or shall we tell the organization that there's some other things needed? Let's us separate and be connected to 2 others.
It's like a very humane way of when things don't work. I want to close up by asking you one more question, and as quickly as you can address this question, which is, you know, being a mentor, especially for the first time, and being a mentee is a little bit out of one's comfort zone. I think that some people don't want to admit they don't know what they're talking about, or some people want to give answers, like on both sides. What recommendations do you have in the first meeting? I know you just talked a little about the coffee. I guess you're going to have to do that virtually now. But what do you recommend to sort of, you know, soften the edges of this discomfort that a lot of people have when they're exposing themselves, on both sides of the fence here? What are your recommendations?
On the side of the mentor, I would say, remember that in your conversations, as you listen, you're going to make some suggestions, but they're just suggestions. This person doesn't work for you. You don't get to tell them what to do. So you're making a suggestion and you're getting feedback on what they think about that in case it needs to be modified. On the other hand, you've got the mentee, and mentees need to realize that when suggestions are made, they need to be willing to try something. They need to be coachable. And if they're not willing to try anything, no, that won't work. No, that won't work. Then they are not really serving as a mentee because they're not open to trying something new. Right. So on the mentor side, it's remember these are suggestions to work through. But on the mentee side, it's you have to try some of those suggestions.
Yeah. I look at that as a gift, right? So somebody's been giving me advice. It's a gift, whether I use it or not, or just say, thank you very much, this has been amazing, and then you move on whatever direction. But, you know, respect the time they're giving you, because they got plenty of other things to do than to be your mentor. So
the last thing is for a mentee to know that a mentor doesn't know everything they need. This mentor knows all these things. A different mentor knows this little slice of things. And a third mentor 2 years later will provide different input. And then they don't expect the mentor to be the be all end all answer. They're going to have the answer to everything I need. No.
Right.
That's the last thing for a mentee to recognize and keep on top of mind.
Nora, thank you very much. If some of the things that you've presented, maybe all of it that you presented, if a mentor listened to this and said, wow, I could be much better by listening to, and thank you, listening to Norma Rist, who had some great insights and been working with women and men for years, and has some great insights. Thank you very much for your time and your
Thank you
effort
for having me, Stephen. I've
and all
enjoyed
the
it.
work and all the work you've done over the years. Thank you very much.
Thank you.